Have you ever finished an IELTS reading passage feeling like completely confident, only to discover your answers were totally wrong?
Oh, yeah. That is honestly the most frustrating feeling in the world.
It really is. And the problem is often not your reading ability at all. It's your understanding of advanced vocabulary in context.
Exactly. Because IELTS doesn't simply test your knowledge of difficult words. It tests your ability to infer meaning from context, right?
Yeah.
From that dense academic language.
Right. Like a passage may say deteriorate while the question says become worse. Or, it might say allocate funds instead of distribute money.
Same exact meaning, just entirely different wording.
Exactly. And that's why memorizing long, boring vocabulary lists is just not enough. So in this deep dive, we'll learn advanced IELTS reading vocabulary naturally. We're going to use real contexts, mini passages, and paraphrasing patterns.
So you can read faster, understand more deeply, and answer with much greater confidence.
Because test makers, they aren't testing your memory. They are testing your linguistic agility. Today, we are hacking the matrix of the reading exam.
I love that phrase, hacking the matrix, because that is exactly the shift in perspective we need to establish right now with you, the listener.
We really do.
We are moving completely away from this mechanical, almost robotic habit of just memorizing dry dictionary definitions.
Yeah, because if you treat language like a math formula, that approach completely collapses the moment you are put under time pressure.
Right. The brain just can't compute it fast enough when the clock is ticking.
Exactly. So instead, our focus today is on cognitive patterns. We are going to examine how these advanced words live and breathe in their natural academic habitats.
How they link together in synonym chains, and crucially, how test makers psychologically engineer their questions to exploit the weak points in your vocabulary.
Spot on. By the end of this deep dive, you won't just be reading isolated words on a page. You will be reading the structural blueprint of the exam itself.
Which is such an empowering way to approach it.
It really is.
Yeah.
But I want to challenge this fundamental philosophy right out of the gate. Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure, go for it.
If you spend 5 minutes searching for IELTS advice online, the vast majority of what you find is focused entirely on mechanical reading skills.
Oh, absolutely. Skimming, scanning.
Right. It's all about skimming for main ideas, scanning for specific dates or names, and just aggressive time management. And logically, that makes sense.
Because you have an enormous amount of text in very little time.
Exactly. But you're essentially arguing that if a candidate's contextual vocabulary recognition is weak, all of those scanning strategies are just, well, an illusion of progress.
They are.
Why is that? Like, why do you call this a vocabulary test in disguise?
Well, it comes down to the science of psychometrics, how exams are actually designed to measure human ability.
Right.
Think about it from the perspective of the linguists who create the test. If they want to know whether you truly comprehend a complex academic text, they cannot simply use the exact same words in the reading passage and the question.
Because if they did that, they wouldn't be testing comprehension.
Exactly. They would just be testing your visual matching skills, like a word search puzzle. Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Right. If the passage says, the climate deteriorated, the question will absolutely never say the climate deteriorated.
It'll say something completely different.
They will say something like the environment became considerably worse, or there was a marked decline in ecological conditions.
Right. And if you are frantically scanning that paragraph 10 times looking for the specific word deteriorated,
and you don't instantly recognize its structural synonyms,
you will just bleed time.
Exactly. You will scan right past the answer again and right again. Paraphrasing is the engine that drives the entire exam.
So it's not just a matter of knowing a word. It's a matter of recognizing its conceptual footprint everywhere it appears.
Yes. And that footprint affects literally every single question type.
Let's look at true, false, not given. Because that is notoriously the hardest section for so many test takers.
Oh, without a doubt. It's brutal.
And when you break it down, it relies almost entirely on your ability to detect meaning matches, like subtle contradictions or missing information within those paraphrases. Exactly. If a passage states, researchers were reluctant to draw conclusions from the limited data,
right,
and the question asks, the researchers were eager to make a final judgment, you have to possess the immediate subconscious knowledge that reluctant is the structural opposite of eager.
If you don't have that instant recognition, you aren't analyzing. You are just guessing.
Precisely. You're flipping a coin.
Right.
And it goes far deeper than just true, false, not given. Let's examine matching headings.
Oh, I hate matching headings.
Everyone does, because this task is a absolute masterclass in psychological distraction.
Yeah.
It is essentially asking you to recognize a main idea that has been deliberately disguised in different, often more abstract language.
Like, give me an example of that.
Okay, imagine a dense 200-word paragraph detailing the long-term systemic effects of digital dependency on the human attention span.
Okay, got it.
The correct heading for that paragraph might be how technology profoundly alters concentration. To make that match, you absolutely must know that the phrase profoundly alters maps directly onto the concept of changes deeply and permanently.
Ah, and if you don't recognize that advanced phrasing,
then your brain will naturally gravitate toward a distractor heading. You know, a wrong option that deliberately uses familiar, simple words from the text, but entirely misses the actual central argument.
it's a trap. It's the same brutal reality with summary completion tasks.
Oh, absolutely. They ruthlessly punish weak academic vocabulary.
Like, let's say the passage reads, the governing committee allocated substantial resources to renewable energy research.
Right.
Then, your summary task asks you to fill in the blank for the sentence. The organization blank a large amount of funding to clean energy studies.
You have to know that allocated functions in this context as assigned or distributed.
Exactly. And multiple choice questions execute the exact same maneuver. The wrong answers, the distractors, they are designed to look comforting.
They look so safe.
They do. They use the familiar words you just saw in the text, but they completely twist the underlying meaning.
While the correct answer usually looks kind of alien, because it uses less familiar paraphrasing.
Even though it represents the true, accurate meaning of the passage.
Spot on. And understanding why test creators do this completely reframes how you should study.
Right, because they aren't doing this to be vindictive or to trick you maliciously.
Not at all. They want to verify true, deep comprehension. Simple word matching proves nothing except that you have functioning eyes and a basic short-term memory.
Yeah, that's a really good point. By hiding the answers behind advanced vocabulary and intricate paraphrasing, they are actively verifying that you actually understand the concepts.
The nuances, the relationships between ideas. That is why context matters infinitely more than whatever definition you memorized from a bilingual dictionary.
Okay, let's unpack that specific idea.
Yeah.
Context over dictionary meaning. I think this is a major stumbling block for a lot of people.
It is a massive roadblock.
Can you give us a concrete example of how relying on a static dictionary definition can actually derail a test taker?
Let's take a seemingly straightforward word like derive.
Okay, derive.
In a basic foundational English class, you probably memorized a flashcard that said derive means to get something from something else.
Right, that's the standard definition.
And that isn't wrong. But in an advanced academic context like IELTS, that word takes on highly nuanced forms depending entirely on the discipline of the reading passage.
How so?
Well, if you're reading a biology text, the passage might discuss how an organism derives energy from sunlight.
Okay, biological process.
But in a sociology passage analyzing research data, a scientist might derive conclusions from empirical evidence.
Oh, totally different feel.
Exactly. In an anthropology text, a culture might derive meaning from historical symbols.
Wow. So the core abstract idea remains the same, but the application shifts dramatically.
Yes. The habit of a student who scores a band 7 or higher is not asking, what does this word mean generally in my native language?
Right.
Instead, they ask, what is the function of this word right here in this specific sentence in relation to the words around it?
It requires an immense amount of linguistic flexibility.
Yeah.
And here's something that I know confused me early on, and I'm sure it's confusing some listeners right now.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier that learning all these nuanced, advanced words actually speeds up your reading.
It does.
But like, if I'm actively trying to juggle 3 different contextual meanings for the word derive while the clock is ticking, doesn't that extra cognitive effort actually slow me down?
I can see why it feels that way.
It feels like trying to learn how to drive a car by memorizing the 400-page engineering manual before you even get behind the wheel.
That's a great analogy.
So if learning more words doesn't slow down your reading, how do you prevent sheer information overload when you turn the page and suddenly encounter this massive wall of dense academic text?
That is a phenomenal question, and it strikes right at the heart of cognitive load theory.
Cognitive load theory, okay?
The answer lies in how our brains process language neurologically. When you encounter a word you don't know, or a word you only vaguely know, your brain hits a literal speed bump.
You just freeze for a second.
Right. The automatic reading process halts. Your conscious mind takes over. It tries to guess the meaning from the surrounding syntax. It tries to translate the word back into your native language.
You hesitate. You second-guess yourself.
Exactly. And that cognitive hesitation is what burns your precious time in the exam hall.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
But when you fluently recognize a word, when you have seen, say, inevitable or empirical a dozen times functioning in different contexts, your brain does not stop to translate.
It just registers the conceptual meaning instantly and continues moving across the sentence.
Exactly. The friction vanishes. Reading becomes as seamless as it is in your native tongue.
So the goal is to remove the friction.
Yes. And the key to preventing that information overload you mentioned is entirely about strategy. You do not learn words in alphabetical order from a dictionary.
Right, please don't do that.
You learn high-frequency academic words in thematic conceptual clusters.
I love that concept, thematic clusters. So instead of learning a random assortment of words, we group them by the conceptual forces that drive academic writing.
Exactly.
Which transitions us perfectly into breaking down our first cluster. We are going to look at the vocabulary of decline, change, and scale.
These are the words that dictate how things shift over time.
Right, and they are incredibly prominent in IELTS passages. Let's start with a classic, deteriorate.
Deteriorate. The fundamental meaning is to decline in quality over time.
So things getting worse.
Right. Its closest synonyms are worsen or degrade. In the IELTS reading exam, you will almost exclusively encounter this word in passages discussing the environment, public health, or physical infrastructure.
What kind of collocations should we look out for?
You will see collocations, which are just words that naturally pair together, like deteriorate rapidly, deteriorating health, or deteriorating air quality.
Okay, got it. So if the reading passage states that the soil fertility continued to deteriorate due to overfarming, the true-false question will likely paraphrase this by asking if the agricultural conditions became progressively worse.
Exactly.
A really effective strategy for locking this word in is to look at its morphology, specifically the prefix D.
Oh, morphology is a great tool.
Right. In English, D almost always signals a downward trajectory or a reduction. Decline, descend, degrade.
So if something is deteriorating, visualize it slowly falling apart, its quality actively moving downwards.
But that brings up an interesting comparison. What about the word diminish?
Diminish.
That also means getting worse or getting smaller, right? What is the subtle, advanced distinction between deteriorate and diminish that a test taker needs to recognize?
That distinction is exactly the kind of nuance test makers look for. Deteriorate is entirely about quality falling apart.
Quality, okay.
It implies decay or structural failure. A historical building deteriorates. A patient's physical health deteriorates. Diminish, on the other hand, is not about quality. It is about size, intensity, or importance shrinking.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
It is. Your motivation to study might diminish over time. The political influence of an empire might diminish. A local wildlife population might diminish.
But you wouldn't say a building diminished.
No, you would not typically say that a brick building diminished unless it literally shrank in physical size like something out of a cartoon.
Right, right.
So one is about quality degrading into a worse state, while the other is about quantity or power fading away.
And a brilliant memory trigger for diminish is to look right at the center of the word. It contains the letters M-I-N-I.
Mini.
Oh, I love that. Right. To make something mini is to diminish it.
That is a fantastic mental hook. Make it mini to diminish it. It instantly separates the concept of size from the concept of quality.
Our next word in this thematic cluster of change is fluctuate.
Fluctuate means to vary irregularly, to shift or oscillate back and forth without a stable pattern.
Where do we see this on the exam?
You will encounter this constantly in academic passages dealing with macroeconomics, global temperatures, or shifting population demographics.
So numbers moving around.
Exactly. Common collocations include prices fluctuate significantly over a decade, or seasonal fluctuations in weather.
If you are listening to this right now, try to visually map this word in your mind. Picture a classic line graph on a piece of paper.
Yes, visualization helps so much.
Imagine that line jaggedly moving up, then sharply down, then up again, erratic and unstable across the page. That jagged, unpredictable movement is fluctuation.
Whenever an IELTS passage describes data going up and down over a period of time, your brain should immediately cue the word fluctuate.
And what happens when a change is so massive that a graph can barely contain it? that leads us to our next word.
Unprecedented.
That's a big one.
This is an incredibly powerful, high-frequency adjective. It means historically unmatched, or something that has literally never been seen, done, or experienced before.
Wow, so no history of it at all.
Exactly. It is a cornerstone word in passages detailing climate change, massive technological leaps, or global economic crises.
Give me some examples of how it's used.
You will read phrases like unprecedented population growth, unprecedented consumer demand, or an unprecedented ecological challenge.
But wait, I want to push back on how this word feels in everyday life versus how it functions on an exam.
Okay, let's hear it.
Is unprecedented always a negative thing? Because when I turn on the television or scroll through a news feed, journalists almost exclusively use it for disasters.
Right.
Like an unprecedented Category 5 hurricane, an unprecedented collapse of the stock market. It carries a heavy, almost apocalyptic tone.
I'm so glad you raised that point because it highlights a massive common trap.
Yeah.
In popular media, yes, it is often sensationalized to imply disaster.
Yeah, always.
But in the neutral, objective realm of IELTS academic reading, unprecedented can be entirely neutral, or even remarkably positive. Yeah. You might read a passage about an unprecedented increase in international applications to a prestigious university, or unprecedented advancements in medical technology that eradicate a disease.
Oh, I see. So the trap is projecting that negative emotional baggage we absorbed from the news onto neutral academic terminology.
Exactly. It does not mean disastrous. It simply objectively means without previous example.
And the easiest way to remember it is to break down the root. A precedent is an earlier example or event that serves as a guide. The prefix un means not, therefore no earlier example exists.
That is a crucial mindset shift. Leave the news media drama at the door. Academic English is objective. Unprecedented simply means it's a first.
Next up in our scale and change cluster, inevitable.
Inevitable means certain to happen. It is an outcome that is unavoidable due to the prevailing circumstances.
So inescapable.
Yes. Its synonyms are inescapable or certain. You will frequently see this in sociological texts discussing massive cultural shifts, the impacts of globalization, or the realities of aging populations.
What are the common pairings for this one?
Collocations to watch for include an inevitable consequence, an inevitable societal change, or an inevitable outcome. An author might argue that increased urban density is an inevitable consequence of rapid industrial expansion.
I always mentally anchor this word by thinking about the word evade, which means to escape or avoid.
Oh, that's good.
If an event is inevitable, you cannot evade it. It is coming for you, regardless of what interventions you try to put in place. It's locked in.
Perfect way to remember it.
And rounding off this first cluster of decline and change, we have the word obsolete.
Obsolete describes something that is no longer produced or used simply because something newer and more effective has been invented to replace it.
So outdated.
Outdated to the point of irrelevance. This is a favorite vocabulary term for IELTS passages dealing with technology, industrial history, and communication.
Like dial-up internet.
Exactly. We read about how methods become obsolete, or we discuss technologically obsolete equipment. To give a real-world example, physical paper maps haven't vanished from the Earth, but for the vast majority of everyday navigation, digital GPS has rendered them completely obsolete.
It's the cycle of the old system being permanently retired by the new system. That covers the forces of decline and change. Now let's pivot to how human beings respond to those changes.
This is a fun section.
Our second thematic cluster focuses entirely on solutions, systems, and resources. These words are the architectural framework for passages about urban planning, corporate policy, and renewable energy.
So many passages on this topic.
Right. And the first word in this group is an absolute giant in the IELTS universe, sustainable.
Sustainable is arguably one of the highest frequency, most critical words on the entire exam. The core definition is able to be maintained at a certain rate or level without causing long-term harm or systemic collapse.
Now, in popular culture, we heavily associate it with being strictly eco-friendly. We think of reusable bags and wind turbines.
Right. But academically, its primary meaning is maintainable over the long haul.
Okay, so it's broader than just the environment.
Much broader. It certainly applies to the environment. We talk about sustainable development and sustainable agriculture. But it equally applies to economics and social systems. We discuss a sustainable business model.
Wow, I see.
If a country's economy is growing incredibly fast, but it's doing so entirely on high-interest borrowed money, that economic growth is not sustainable. It will eventually hit a wall and crash.
That is such an important distinction. It's not just about being green, it's about the physics of momentum. Can the system sustain its own weight?
Exactly. You have to be able to keep it going indefinitely. If you can't, it's not sustainable.
Word number 2 in this systems cluster. Allocate.
To allocate means to assign or distribute resources strategically for a specific purpose.
It's very deliberate.
Highly deliberate. It is an action word used almost exclusively for institutions and systems. Governments allocate emergency funds. University students must allocate their time efficiently for exam revision. Multinational institutions allocate natural resources.
How does this show up in a reading passage trap?
Well, if you encounter a sentence stating that a city council allocated heavy funding to public transport infrastructure, the corresponding question might paraphrase this by asking if the council set aside money or directed its financial resources toward public transit.
The easiest memory trick for allocate is to look for the word location hidden right inside the spelling.
Yes.
When you allocate resources, you are quite literally putting them in a specific location or assigning them to a highly specific destination. You are strategically placing them where they are needed most.
That's exactly how it works.
Now let's transition to a word that evaluates how good those placements are. A word that often judges the quality of human solutions. Viable.
Viable describes an idea, plan, or method that is capable of working successfully under actual, real-world conditions.
So, feasible or practical?
Yes, realistic. Academic texts constantly debate whether a proposed idea is actually a viable solution. We analyze an economically viable business plan or search for a commercially viable alternative to fossil fuels.
So it's not just a nice idea on paper.
Right. Building a massive dome over a city to control the weather might be an interesting thought experiment, but from an engineering and economic standpoint, it is simply not a viable option. It won't work in reality.
It has to survive contact with the real world to be viable. And that brings us to mitigate, which is a word I honestly hear misused all the time, even by native speakers.
Oh, constantly. That happens frequently because people conflate it with solving a problem.
Exactly. They think mitigate means to fix it.
But it doesn't. Mitigate specifically means to make something harmful less severe, less harsh, or less painful. It is about easing an impact, not eliminating the source.
Give us some examples of mitigating.
You mitigate financial risk by diversifying investments. You mitigate structural damage. Governments introduce stimulus packages to mitigate the severe effects of an economic recession.
Right, the recession is still happening.
Exactly. Civil engineers construct massive seawalls to mitigate the destructive impact of seasonal flooding on coastal towns. The flood still happens, but the damage is lessened.
This is where the psychology of the exam gets really fascinating for me.
Yeah.
If we look at mitigate and compare it to viable, there's a massive functional difference in how they operate as solutions.
Definitely.
I always conceptualize mitigating a problem as putting a heavy bandage on a deeply bleeding wound. It lessens the immediate harm. It stops you from bleeding out in that exact moment.
It's a great visual.
But a viable solution is the actual surgery that cures the underlying injury. Do IELTS test makers deliberately pair abstract words like these in summary completion or multiple choice tasks just to confuse candidates?
They absolutely do, and it is one of their most effective traps.
Wow.
Test takers who lack deep vocabulary precision will very often confuse a temporary patch with a permanent fix.
So how does the trap work?
If a dense reading passage explicitly states that a new government policy only mitigated the housing crisis, meaning it provided some minor temporary relief, and a summary question confidently states that the policy cured or resolved the housing issue, that is a classic false or not given trap.
Because mitigate emphatically does not mean solve. It means to make a bad situation slightly less bad.
Exactly. And speaking of making things less heavy, a great phonetic memory tip for mitigate is that it sounds a bit like make it lighter. You are lightening the burden of the problem.
Make it lighter. That is brilliant and sticky. You mitigate the weight of the issue. Let's move to the word conventional, which dictates the systems we already use.
Conventional means traditional, standard, or entirely in accordance with what is generally done or believed.
So the normal way.
Yes. It is based on accepted, long-standing methods rather than sudden innovation. Academic writers frequently discuss conventional wisdom, which refers to the generally accepted beliefs of the public.
We hear about conventional medicine a lot.
Right, conventional medicine as opposed to alternative therapies. Or conventional farming methods that rely heavily on chemical fertilizers rather than organic ecosystems.
And from a structural reading perspective, Test makers adore using this word to set up an organizational contrast, don't they?
Oh, they love it.
They will spend paragraph A detailing the conventional method, the old standard way of doing things, and then paragraph B will introduce the new, innovative, highly disruptive alternative method.
Yes, it's a classic structure.
So as a reader, the moment your eyes hit the word conventional, your brain should immediately prepare for a contrast. You should be asking yourself, okay, what is the new thing that is going to challenge this convention?
That is reading actively right there.
And the final word in our solutions and systems cluster is reinforce.
Reinforce means to strengthen or support an idea, a physical structure, or a behavior. The context can be literal or abstract.
Literal like a building.
Yeah, you can reinforce a physical suspension bridge with extra steel cables. But structurally, an author can reinforce their central argument by providing additional statistical data.
Or a teacher.
Right, a teacher might reinforce a student's learning through frequent review sessions. A marketing campaign is designed to reinforce consumer buying habits. It literally translates to forcing something again or making it stronger than it was before.
Fantastic. All right, we have covered the forces of change and the systems we build to manage them. Take a deep breath, because we are now crossing over into the deepest, most rigorously academic territory of the exam.
The heavy stuff.
This is our third thematic cluster, the vocabulary of research, logic, and data. If you want to conquer or even survive passages about hard science, cognitive psychology, or sociological studies, this is your mandatory toolkit. Word number 1 in this arena, empirical.
Empirical. This word is the bedrock of scientific reading. It means based on, concerned with, or verifiable by observation or physical experience, rather than by theory or pure logic alone.
Okay, so it has to be proven.
Exactly. It is knowledge supported by hard, measurable evidence. Its primary synonyms are evidence-based, observational, or experimental.
What are the opposites then?
The direct antonyms, the opposites, would be theoretical, speculative, or hypothetical. In texts, you will constantly see collocations like empirical evidence, empirical research, or hypotheses that have been empirically tested in a laboratory.
So to put it simply, if a brilliant physicist just sits in a comfortable armchair, thinks really hard, and comes up with a beautiful, mathematically elegant idea about how the universe works, that is theoretical.
Yes.
But if that same physicist actually goes out into the world, builds a telescope, gathers hard data, runs controlled experiments, and mathematically measures the results against reality, that becomes empirical.
Beautifully explained.
A solid mental shortcut is to remember that empirical equals experiment plus tangible proof. Now, what's truly fascinating here is how this specific word plays into the mechanics of true, false, not given questions. Can you break down that specific trap?
Absolutely. The trap relies on the candidate's inability to distinguish between types of knowledge. Empirical is very often the silent pivot point for a true-false trap.
Give us a scenario.
Imagine an IELTS passage explicitly stating that a controversial psychological theory now has strong empirical support.
Okay.
Then you read the corresponding question, which claims that the psychological theory is based primarily on assumption and expert opinion. The answer to that question is undeniably fundamentally false.
Because empirical is the opposite of assumption.
Yes. Empirical means the exact, literal opposite of assumption. It means it has been rigorously proven by physical observation. If you don't know that empirical means data-driven, you might think support and opinion are close enough to guess true.
That makes perfect logical sense. You are being tested on your ability to separate hard data from soft theory. Next up in our logic cluster is coherent.
Coherent describes something that is logically clear, consistent, and unified. It applies primarily to arguments, complex explanations, and theoretical structures.
So it's about things making sense together.
Right. A university professor strives to present a coherent explanation of quantum mechanics. A high-scoring IELTS essay must have a coherent structure.
Meaning it flows logically.
Exactly. A government's foreign policy should ideally be internally coherent, meaning it doesn't contradict itself. If an argument is coherent, all the individual disparate parts fit together perfectly to make total logical sense.
Think of the morphology again. The prefix co means together, like in cooperate or coworker. And the root here is related to adhesive, like something sticking. So to cohere means to literally stick together in a logical, unbreakable way.
That's a great way to remember it.
Moving forward, we have the word derive, which we actually touched upon briefly in our introduction. Let's formalize it.
Yes, to derive means to obtain something from a specific source, or to originate from a base. It is about extracting meaning, benefit, or origin.
What's the pattern to look for?
The most common grammatical pattern to scan for is derive X from Y. For example, linguistically, many modern English words derive from ancient Latin.
Or energy.
Right. In engineering, modern solar panels derive their energy output directly from sunlight. It is the academic way of tracking the origin of a resource or an idea.
Next is a word with a lot of cultural baggage. Sophisticated. Now, when I hear the word sophisticated in everyday life, I immediately picture someone in a tailored tuxedo at a very fancy, high society dinner party drinking an expensive martini. It implies elegance and culture.
I think we all picture James Bond.
Exactly. But how does IELTS deploy this word in a dense science text?
That cultural image is exactly what trips people up. In the context of IELTS reading, sophisticated strips away the tuxedo and almost exclusively means advanced, highly complex, or technically intricate.
So it's not about being fancy.
No, it is not about social elegance. It is about highly developed design and capability. You will frequently read about sophisticated medical technology, sophisticated statistical forecasting models, or a highly sophisticated communication system observed among deep-sea marine life.
Meaning is very evolved.
Yes, it means something has evolved or been engineered to a very high degree.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here. If sophisticated essentially means advanced or complicated, how do we intellectually distinguish it from a simpler word like complex? Are they just completely interchangeable synonyms that writers use to avoid repeating themselves?
That is a highly nuanced and excellent question. While they reside in the same synonym family, they are not perfectly interchangeable.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Complex simply means consisting of many different and interconnecting parts. A spider's web is complex, a massive traffic jam in a city is complex.
Right.
But sophisticated implies a high level of deliberate refinement, intentional design, or an incredibly advanced evolutionary trait.
So there's an element of design to it.
Yes. It implies that a high degree of human ingenuity or natural selection has polished the system. A modern computer algorithm isn't just complex, it is sophisticated. It has been refined through iteration to handle nuance.
So while a raw problem can be complex, a brilliantly engineered solution is sophisticated.
Exactly, you nailed it.
That distinction is incredibly helpful. Complexity can be messy, but sophistication is refined. Our next research word is one that causes endless headaches for test takers. Ambiguous.
Oh, ambiguous. This means unclear, inexact, or entirely open to multiple interpretations because of inherent vagueness. It is the absolute enemy of scientific precision.
Scientists must hate ambiguity.
They do. In research passages, we constantly see warnings about ambiguous wording in surveys, ambiguous experimental results, or historical evidence that remains deeply ambiguous.
So if a survey is ambiguous,
If a psychological survey question is ambiguous, scientists cannot trust the resulting data because different participants might have understood the core question in completely different ways.
and this leads right into another massive, high-stakes trap for true, false, not given. Imagine the reading passage details a long, expensive scientific study, but concludes by stating that the final findings of the study were ultimately ambiguous.
Okay, setting the scene.
Then, the test question confidently asserts that the scientists reached a definite, unquestionable conclusion regarding the phenomenon. That statement is a hard part. False.
Completely false.
Ambiguous means the data is big, messy, open-ended, and fundamentally unclear. Definite is its polar opposite. If you don't know ambiguous, you might assume a completed study automatically means a definite conclusion.
Which is exactly what the test makers are hoping you'll assume.
Next in the data cluster is comprehensive.
Comprehensive means complete, exhaustively detailed, and wide-ranging. It covers all, or nearly all, relevant aspects of a given subject matter.
Academics love this word.
Academic literature is obsessed with being comprehensive. You will see phrases like a comprehensive analysis of the data, a comprehensive review of all prior scientific literature, or a comprehensive urban development plan.
A really simple way to lock this in is to look at the root word. If a report allows you to comprehend everything about a topic without leaving any gaps, the coverage is comprehensive.
Just remember, though, it doesn't mean easy.
Right. Note that it does not mean the report is easy to understand. A comprehensive manual on quantum physics will be incredibly difficult to read, but it will include every single necessary detail.
Exactly. Complete, but not necessarily simple.
And the final word in our research and logic cluster is manipulate.
To manipulate means to handle, control, or fundamentally alter something.
Now, in general, society and everyday conversation, manipulating someone has a deeply negative, toxic connotation. It means you are tricking them or emotionally controlling them for your own gain.
Right, like a manipulative person.
But in the realm of hard science and IELTS academic reading, manipulate is often an entirely neutral, objective action.
It is. It simply means to handle or alter a physical object or variable skillfully. A laboratory researcher absolutely must manipulate the environmental variables in a controlled experiment to see what happens to the outcome.
They aren't tricking the variables.
No, they are just systematically changing the physical conditions, turning up the heat, changing the light, things like that.
So the surrounding context completely dictates the moral tone of the word. And speaking of tone, that rolls us perfectly into our fourth and final vocabulary cluster.
We made it to the final cluster.
This group focuses entirely on society, attitude, and influence. These words are absolutely vital because they don't just tell you what happened, they tell you how the author or the researchers mentioned in the passage actually feel about the topic. First word, reluctant.
Reluctant means deeply unwilling or hesitant. It shows a clear psychological or strategic resistance to taking an action.
So dragging your feet.
Exactly. You might read that a prominent scientist was reluctant to admit their earlier theory was flawed, or that a local government committee was a reluctant participant in a controversial new national policy.
It strongly signals hesitation, often driven by fear of consequences, strategic caution, or emotional resistance.
Yeah.
If you are reluctant, you are actively holding yourself back from doing something. Yep. What about our next word? Controversial.
Controversial describes a subject, idea, or person that causes prolonged, intense public disagreement or is highly likely to provoke intense debate.
We hear this one a lot in the news, too.
We do. We frequently encounter passages discussing controversial political issues, a controversial new tax policy, or a controversial scientific theory like human cloning.
But what's the trick here for the exam?
The critical high-level IELTS insight here is that controversial emphatically does not mean wrong, incorrect, or debunked. It simply objectively means that large groups of people strongly disagree about its validity or ethics.
Let me stop you there because that is a trap that catches thousands of students.
It really does.
If an IELTS passage objectively describes a new sociological theory as highly controversial, and the test question asks if the theory has been proven false by the academic community, the answer is not given, or possibly false, depending on the surrounding text. We only know that people are arguing about it. We do not have the data to say it is factually incorrect. Controversy simply equals loud argument.
That is the perfect way to summarize it.
Next up, profound.
Profound means very great, exceptionally deep, or intensely felt. It is a magnitude word, and it is exponentially stronger than simply saying something is important.
So it's a structural shift.
It implies a far-reaching structural shift. You will see collocations like a profound economic impact, a profound psychological effect, or profound structural changes to a society. A researcher might state that early childhood trauma has a profound effect on adult personality development.
It's an impact so deep that it goes profoundly down to the very roots of the subject. Next is advocate.
As a verb, to advocate means to publicly recommend or actively support a particular cause, policy, or idea. It is the language of debate and progression.
Like climate scientists.
Right. Climate scientists advocate for immediate carbon reduction. A prominent economist might strongly advocate for a universal basic income. It signifies taking a firm vocal stance.
To advocate is to, quite literally, add your vocal support to a movement. You are speaking for the idea. Next, we have a word that looks intimidating.
Phenomenon.
A phenomena is simply an observed fact, an event, or a recurring trend that is considered highly worthy of scientific or philosophical study.
It sounds incredibly formal and mysterious.
It does, but academically, it just means a notable occurrence that we want to understand. Mass climate migration is a global phenomenon. The psychological experience of sleep paralysis is a neurological phenomenon.
It's an event that is phenomenal enough to study. And that brings us to our last core vocabulary word for today's structural breakdown. Predominant.
Predominant means the most common, the strongest, or the prevailing element in a given system. It describes the entity that has the greatest overall influence or sheer numbers.
Like the main factor. Yes. In a geographical reading, agriculture might be described as the predominant source of income in a rural region. In a psychology text, Peer social pressure might be identified as the predominant factor influencing adolescent risk-taking behavior. It is the factor that stands head and shoulders above all the minor contributing factors.
All right, we have covered a truly massive amount of intellectual ground here. We've dissected the anatomy of these words.
We definitely have.
But before we move on to seeing these words hunting in the wild, in actual reading passages, we're going to take a deliberate, interactive cognitive break.
Good idea.
I want you, the person listening to this deep dive right now, to engage in active shadowing. Unless you are sitting in a dead silent public library, I want you to say these advanced words out loud right after I say them.
Because the physical act of speaking helps lock it in.
Exactly. The physical motor mechanic act of speaking engages a completely different neural pathway than passive listening, and it actively locks the pronunciation and memory into your brain. Ready? I will say it, and you repeat it. Empirical.
Empirical.
Mitigate. Ambiguous.
Ambiguous. Comprehensive.
Comprehensive.
Unprecedented. Unprecedented. Let's do it one more time, but this time I am going to slow it down. I want you to feel the physical syllables in your mouth. Empirical. Empirical. Mitigate. Mitigate. Ambiguous. Ambiguous. Comprehensive. Comprehensive. Unpreregulated. Unpreregulated. Now here is your immediate intellectual challenge. Pick any two of those words you just spoke and internally construct a complete logical sentence in your head right now.
That's a great exercise.
Something simple but accurate, like the empirical data surrounding the study remains deeply ambiguous. Active linguistic production is the only thing that transitions a word from your short-term memory into your permanent exam toolkit. Do not just sit back and passively let this audio wash over you. Use the architecture of the words. That is genuinely crucial advice. Passive recognition is an illusion of competence. It is only half the battle. Active, deliberate use creates the robust neural pathways that allow for lightning-fast, rapid recall when you are staring down a ticking clock during the actual exam.
Exactly. Knowing the dictionary definition of the words is step one. Seeing how those words behave and disguise themselves in the wild is step two.
Time to look at the matrix.
We are now going to look directly at the matrix of the test. We're going to analyze some complex academic paragraphs and learn exactly how to dismantle the linguistic traps that test makers carefully set for you. Let's look at our first text, which focuses on urban air quality.
Let's hear it.
I am going to read a dense, short paragraph. As I read, I want you to actively listen for the vocabulary we just spent time breaking down. Here we go. Over the past 2 decades, air quality in many rapidly expanding cities has deteriorated despite highly publicized government promises to drastically reduce industrial emissions.
Did you catch that first one? We heard deteriorated, which establishes the downward trajectory things became worse.
Exactly. Continuing on. Researchers actively argue that the core problem is not simply the raw number of private vehicles on the road, but rather the glaring lack of a comprehensive urban transport strategy.
And there's comprehensive, meaning they need a complete, wide-ranging, and interconnected plan, not just isolated ideas.
Next sentence. Although experimental electric buses have been introduced in several pilot areas, environmental experts warn that these isolated measures alone are vastly insufficient to mitigate the long-term compounding effects of airborne pollution.
They fail to mitigate the effects, meaning they fail to adequately reduce or lighten the harmful impact of the pollution.
Last sentence. Alarmingly, in several major cities, children living in close proximity to heavy industrial zones have shown a profound decline in respiratory health, a troubling trend that many pediatric doctors describe as both entirely preventable and politically controversial.
So we observed a profound decline in health, meaning the drop was severe, deep, and highly significant. And finally, the situation was labeled controversial, meaning it is causing intense public and political debate.
Now, looking at this through the lens of test design, how does IELTS weaponize this paragraph to set a trap for the candidate?
The primary trap engineered into this specific text is entirely about ignoring the adjectives. The test exploits the way our brains scan for information.
Like, give us an example question.
Let's say you're facing a true, false, not given question that boldly states, health problems among children residing in heavily polluted districts are generally minor and temporary.
What is the immediate instinct of an untrained student?
Well, they scan the massive text, their eyes lock onto the nouns children, health, and polluted industrial zones. Their brain releases a little hit of dopamine, aha, I found the exact location in the text.
Oh, man.
But because they are panicking about the time limit, they skim the actual sentence far too fast. The passage explicitly states that the children showed a profound decline in health.
Right on the mark. And that is where the trap snaps shut. The word profound means deeply serious, severe, and far-reaching. The test question deliberately uses the word minor. Profound is the structural and absolute opposite of minor. Therefore, the statement is unequivocally false.
But untrained students frequently focus all of their cognitive energy only on the nouns, the physical subjects of the sentence, and they completely gloss over the adjectives.
But in high-level academic reading, it is the adjectives, words like severe, profound, limited, ambiguous, or inevitable, that actually control the entire meaning and direction of the sentence.
The nouns are just the car, but the adjectives are the steering wheel. They dictate where the sentence is actually going.
That's a perfect analogy. Let's escalate the difficulty and look at a second text, this one centered on the intersection of technology and human attention. Listen closely to the abstract tone. Some cognitive psychologists argue that the widespread daily use of digital social platforms has produced an unprecedented shift in human attention patterns.
Unprecedented shift signals a totally new, historically unparalleled change in behavior.
Next line. While earlier, analog generations interacted with long-form information in a much more linear, focused way, modern digital users are constantly exposed to rapid, multiple streams of fragmented content.
Okay, setting up the contrast.
This environmental shift has led some prominent scholars to suggest that the fundamental human ability to maintain deep, prolonged concentration may gradually diminish over the coming decades.
The concern that concentration may diminish points to a gradual weakening or reduction in mental capacity.
Others in the scientific community, however, are highly reluctant to accept such sweeping claims without significantly stronger empirical evidence. They passionately argue that although human digital behavior has undeniably changed, the long-term cognitive consequences of this shift remain entirely uncertain.
We see researchers who are reluctant to accept the claims, meaning they are highly hesitant and skeptical. And what are they demanding? Empirical evidence. They want hard, measurable, observational data, not just observational panic.
Now, if we connect this text to the broader psychometric strategies of the IELTS exam, the trap embedded here relies heavily on the use of extreme, absolute statements in the questions.
Oh, I recognize this mechanism perfectly.
If the corresponding test question says, all cognitive psychologists fundamentally agree that digital technology has severely damaged human concentration, a well-trained candidate should immediately have loud cognitive alarm bells ringing in their head.
Absolutely. The tension between the text and the question is glaring. The reading passage specifically and carefully notes that some cognitive psychologists argue this point.
And the very next breath, it explicitly states, others in the scientific community, however, are highly reluctant to accept such sweeping claims.
That directly proves there is active, ongoing disagreement within the field. So the inclusion of the absolute word all in the test question makes a statement definitively false.
Because academic texts are meticulously edited to use very careful, balanced, highly nuanced language, academic authors love to use words like some, often, tend to suggest, or may indicate.
Yes. When an IELTS question aggressively translates that careful nuance into absolute words like all, never, always, or conclusively prove, it is almost always a deliberately engineered trap.
So extreme, uncompromising words in test questions act as massive warning signs that you are being lured into a false or not given answer.
Exactly. Keep an eye out for them.
Let's tackle our third text, which delves into the economics of sustainable agriculture. Pay attention to the push and pull of the arguments here. Quote, in direct response to increasing global climate instability, many rural farming communities are actively experimenting with more sustainable methods of food production. These innovative interventions include systemic crop rotation, drastically reduced pesticide use, and highly improved soil management techniques.
Sustainable methods indicates practices that are maintainable without causing long-term ecological or economic collapse.
Ardent supporters fiercely advocate these methods not only because they demonstrably protect fragile local ecosystems, but also because they may remain economically viable for the farmers in the long term.
The fact that supporters advocate these methods means they publicly and vocally recommend them. And the hope that they remain viable means the practices must be practical and financially workable in real life, not just good in theory.
Vocal critics, however, strongly argue that such eco-friendly approaches are inherently less productive than conventional industrial agriculture, and therefore may not supply enough sheer caloric volume for rapidly growing global populations.
The critics contrast this with conventional agriculture, referring to the traditional, standard, chemical-heavy farming methods of the last century.
Recent comprehensive studies suggest that the underlying truth is far more complex, as overall agricultural productivity tends to naturally fluctuate, depending heavily on highly localized climate conditions and varying access to technological resources.
And finally, the conclusion that yields fluctuate means that crop productivity is not static. It constantly varies, moving up and down based on external factors.
The psychological trap engineered into this passage is very similar to the extreme language trap we just discussed, but applied to frequency.
Frequency, right.
If a true-false question confidently asks, alternative farming methods always produce a lower volume of food than traditional chemical agriculture, you have to analyze the claims. The passage clearly tells us that vocal critics argue they are less productive.
But the objective, comprehensive studies conclude that actual productivity fluctuates. It varies up and down.
Therefore, the restrictive word always in the question is factually inaccurate based on the text. The answer is false.
Spot on.
Okay, we are moving to our final and most difficult text. Text 4 deals with language, identity, and society. I want you to listen very closely to how incredibly abstract and philosophical the vocabulary gets in this paragraph. For many historically marginalized communities, language serves as far more than a mere pragmatic communication tool. It is a profound cultural phenomenon that intimately reflects collective identity, historical memory, and deep social belonging.
So we have phenomenon there, highlighting this as a major cultural event worthy of study.
In increasingly globalized, multilingual societies, one dominant language may swiftly become predominant in the spheres of formal education and government administration, while minority dialects gradually become less visible in the public square.
Predominant, meaning the most common or ruling language.
Some modern linguists argue that when younger assimilated generations completely stop using their ancestral languages, subtle but vital forms of embedded cultural knowledge may quickly become obsolete.
Obsolete, the old knowledge fades away because it's no longer used.
Others in the field suggest, however, that a community's core cultural identity can still remain internally coherent even when everyday language use fundamentally changes, provided that specific historical traditions are actively and passionately maintained through intimate family and community life.
Phenomenon, predominant, obsolete, coherent. This specific paragraph is exceptionally loaded with highly abstract, conceptual, high-level vocabulary.
It really is.
And frankly, this exact type of passage is where a significant percentage of test takers experience total cognitive panic.
Oh, totally. They read abstract philosophical terms like phenomenon and coherent, and their brain just freezes up.
They burn 5 minutes desperately trying to translate the deep philosophical soul of the paragraph perfectly into their native language, and they lose the thread entirely.
So what does this practical reality mean for you, the candidate listening right now? Imagine I am sitting under the fluorescent lights of the exam hall. I am staring at this dense text about language and identity. The digital clock is mercilessly ticking down, and this abstract vocabulary is making my brain completely freeze.
The nightmare scenario.
How do I actually build a functional relationship map of this paragraph under intense time pressure without attempting to perfectly translate every single philosophical noun? How do I logically get unstuck?
You get unstuck by making a massive strategic realization. You do not need to understand the deep philosophical soul of the paragraph to answer the question. You only need to understand its structural skeleton.
Read for the skeleton.
Yes. You build a rapid relationship map by taking your pencil and actively circling transition words and thematic nouns, drawing arrows between them.
Walk us through that.
In that terrifyingly abstract passage, you focus entirely on the contrasts. You see the word predominant explicitly connected to majority languages, and the phrase less visible connected to minority languages. In your mind, you draw an arrow. Majority influence goes up, minority influence goes down.
Okay, it's simple enough.
You see the highly negative word obsolete directly connected to the concept of losing ancestral languages. Arrow down. You see the positive, structured word coherent directly connected to the idea of actively maintaining traditions. Arrow up.
Oh, wow.
You absolutely do not need to formulate a perfect dictionary quality translation of what a coherent cultural identity truly means in a sociological sense. You just need to recognize the mathematical equation the author is building. Keeping traditions equals identity stays intact.
You map the structural relationships. Language connects to identity. The loss of a language contrasts with the preservation of a tradition. Reading for structural relationships is infinitely faster and far more accurate than reading for perfect literal translation.
Exactly. Read for the skeleton, not the soul.
That is an incredibly powerful, liberating piece of advice. And that conceptual framework transitions us perfectly into our next focus, advanced IELTS strategies and our active interaction segment. Let's actually test those relationship mapping skills right now with a rapid-fire guessing game.
I love this game.
I'm going to give you a single sentence, and I want you, the listener, to logically deduce the meaning of the target word solely from the surrounding context clues. We will take it slow so you can actually ponder the mechanics. Ready?
Ready.
Sentence 1. The findings of the 3-year study were considered completely ambiguous, primarily because different lead researchers interpreted the exact same data in radically different ways.
Okay, focus on those context clues.
Take a second. What does ambiguous probably mean in that specific sentence? If you logically deduce that it means unclear, confusing, or open to more than one distinct meaning, you are right on the mark. The massive context clue there was the phrase, interpreted in radically different ways. If people are arguing about what it means, it must be ambiguous.
Let's try sentence 2. In the immediate aftermath of the devastating storm, the federal government allocated millions in emergency funding specifically to the hardest-hit coastal regions.
Yeah. What does allocated functionally mean here?
Think about the entity acting a government and the object funding. If you deduced that it means assigned, distributed, or gave for a highly specific purpose, you were spot on. Governments distribute or place funding.
Let's do sentence 3. The deep-sea marine scientists used incredibly sophisticated equipment to successfully detect microscopic, previously invisible changes in ocean temperature.
So what does sophisticated mean in this specific technical context?
If you bypassed the idea of a fancy tuxedo and guessed highly advanced, complex, or technologically cutting edge, you absolutely nailed it. Equipment capable of detecting microscopic, invisible changes simply must be technologically advanced.
Engaging in this specific kind of contextual guessing practice is exactly what trains your brain to function like a high-scoring Band 8 or 9 IELTS candidate. It forces you to rely on logic rather than just memory.
And this leads us directly into codifying our core advanced strategies. Strategy 1 is the active construction of synonym chains. As we have seen exhaustively today, IELTS is an exam that relentlessly transforms language.
It really does.
If the reading passage stakes, the university committee was highly reluctant to endorse the radical proposal, and the corresponding test question asked the committee was unwilling to support the new plan, you must have the ability to instantly mentally map that reluctant equals unwilling, endorse structurally equals support, and proposal functionally equals plan.
If you actively practice building these interconnected mental maps during your daily study, your overall reading speed and comprehension will soar because you are no longer translating, you are pattern matching.
That is profound.
Yeah.
Strategy 2 focuses on recognizing academic tone. Academic writers, the people who author these dense passages, do not generally rant, rave, or scream on the page.
No, they're very polite.
They do not write, "This scientific idea is absolutely terrible and stupid." They utilize highly polite, understated academic criticism. They will write, "This methodological approach has significant drawbacks," or "The final outcome of the experiment was less than ideal," or "The empirical evidence regarding this phenomenon remains inconclusive."
Which sounds so mild.
It does. You have to deliberately train your ear to recognize that a word like inconclusive is actually a devastatingly harsh academic criticism. It means the multi-million-dollar study completely failed to prove its central point. You have to read the polite aggression between the lines.
Undoubtedly. You have to decode the academic politeness. And that brings us to strategy 3, identifying distractor vocabulary.
This is a big one.
This is an absolutely crucial survival skill, particularly for multiple choice questions. A distractor is an intentionally designed answer option that looks incredibly comforting and familiar to a panicking student because it copy-pastes exact shiny words straight from the reading text.
But crucially, it completely mangles the underlying grammatical meaning.
Yes. For example, imagine the reading text explicitly states, "The new solar technology is highly effective, but only under strictly controlled laboratory conditions." A distractor answer option might confidently state, "The new technology is generally reliable in all environmental conditions."
I always conceptualize distractor vocabulary by comparing it to a shimmering mirage in a scorching desert.
Oh, that's perfect.
Imagine you are dehydrated, you are exhausted, you are deeply stressed, which is exactly how you feel in hour 2 of the IELTS exam. And you look out across the sand and see exactly what you have been desperately searching for. It looks exactly like cool water. The answer option uses the exact same impressive nouns from the paragraph, but it is a complete manufactured illusion.
It is a psychometric trap designed specifically to trick candidates who are skimming too fast.
Strictly controlled laboratory conditions is the absolute polar opposite of all environmental conditions. You have to train yourself to look past the shiny familiar nouns and aggressively interrogate the actual meaning of the sentence.
That mirage analogy is perfectly accurate. It looks like safety, but it's a trap. And strategy 4 is intimately related to avoiding that mirage. Read without translating.
Stop translating in your head.
Advanced high-scoring readers emphatically do not stop and halt their momentum for every single unknown word they encounter. They focus relentlessly on the macro structure, the main topic, the structural contrast, words like however, although, or despite the flow of cause and effect, and the overall attitude of the author.
When you inevitably hit a massive, terrifying word you don't know, do not panic. Take a breath and ask yourself a series of logical questions. Is this specific word actually essential to answering the current test question? Or is it just academic fluff?
Can I accurately guess its rough emotional tone? Is it positive or negative from the surrounding context? Does the rest of the sentence provide me with enough functional information to keep moving forward?
Most of the time, if you stay calm, the answer to that last question is yes. You just have to trust your logical deduction.
And rounding out our high-level strategies are numbers 5 and 6, active vocabulary mapping, and conceptual chunking.
Please do not try to learn advanced vocabulary by staring at a random alphabetical list from A to Z. It is incredibly inefficient.
Map words by their conceptual theme. Create a mental folder in your brain labeled environmental systems and place words like mitigate, sustainable, deteriorate, and viable inside it.
Create another folder labeled scientific research and add empirical, coherent, ambiguous, and derive. The human brain stores and retrieves information far more efficiently in interconnected networks, not in isolated alphabetical boxes.
And when you do learn these words, learn them in grammatical chunks. Do not just memorize the isolated word profound. Memorize the entire chunk, profound impact.
Do not just memorize allocate. Memorize allocate resources. When you see that complete chunk on the printed page, your brain processes it as one single instantaneous unit of meaning, saving you massive amounts of cognitive processing time.
It is the exact difference between a child trying to read a long word letter by agonizing letter versus a fluent adult recognizing the entire shape of the word in a fraction of a second. Chunking allows you to recognize whole, complex academic phrases at a glance.
We're firmly on the home stretch now. This brings us to our final focus: mindset, motivation, and the daily routine. Let me take a moment to say something directly to you that I think a lot of candidates desperately need to hear if they are drowning in study materials for this exam right now.
Yes, listen closely to this.
You absolutely do not need to know every single obscure word in the English language to achieve a high band 7, 8, or 9 score in IELTS rating. You just don't. That is a myth that drives people to exhaustion. You simply need to know the right high-frequency academic words deeply, and you need to fluently recognize structural paraphrasing patterns.
That is a fundamental, liberating truth. A significant number of advanced learners become incredibly, deeply frustrated with themselves. They constantly ask, why do I keep forgetting these advanced words? Why do these reading passages still feel so impenetrable and difficult?
They mistakenly believe that vocabulary growth should be a perfectly straight, upward mathematical line.
But human neurology doesn't work that way. Vocabulary acquisition is heavily layered. You meet a complex word like empirical for the very first time, and it feels completely alien and intimidating.
You encounter it a week later buried in a reading passage, and it feels vaguely, frustratingly familiar.
You hear it broken down on a deep dive like this one, and suddenly the underlying logic clicks into place. But it isn't until you actively use it to construct a sentence in a practice essay that the word truly, permanently becomes yours.
It is a chaotic process of repeated, varied exposure, not an act of instant photographic perfection. Depth beats panic. I absolutely love that phrase from our preparation notes for today. Depth beats panic every single time. Stop trying to frantically cram 50 random words a day into your exhausted brain. It simply will not work. They will evaporate by tomorrow morning.
Instead, I want you to try this highly focused 20-minute daily routine. It is incredibly simple, but neurologically, it is devastatingly effective.
Okay, let's break it down.
First, spend exactly 5 minutes reading a single, short, incredibly dense academic paragraph. Do not read a whole article, just one paragraph.
Next, spend 5 minutes actively underlining 3 to 5 highly useful abstract academic words or phrases within that text.
Then spend 5 minutes physically writing. Write down what you logically deduce the meaning is from the context. Write down one structural synonym, write down one common collocation, and critically, write one entirely original sentence utilizing the word.
Finally, spend the last 5 minutes engaged in active shadowing, saying the new words in your original sentences out loud to build that motor memory, and quickly reviewing the words you learned yesterday.
It is only 20 minutes a day, but it is deep, highly active, structurally sound learning.
And to effectively supplement that daily routine, you must remember a few key psychological mindset shifts. You must actively shift your internal monologue from asking, how many raw words should I force myself to memorize today? To asking, how can I actively notice this specific word functioning in different reading situations?
Emphasize learning collocations over isolating single words. Pay obsessive attention to tone words. Words like reluctant or advocate, because they act as the emotional and directional compass of the entire passage.
And above all else, commit to regular, short, highly focused review sessions rather than exhausting marathon cramming sessions the week before your exam date. I enthusiastically agree with every single piece of that framework, especially the critical component of active production. Speaking the vocabulary out loud, physically writing it down in original sentences.
That active physical engagement is the neurological glue that permanently locks the abstract word into your long-term memory.
Just sitting there staring passively at a glowing app full of flashcards gives you a dangerous illusion of learning. But active, difficult use is the actual reality of learning.
Without a doubt, if you are deep in the trenches preparing for the IELTS exam right now, and you are feeling completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of text, you must remember that every single passage you struggle through is high-level training.
Every single new abstract word you successfully figure out from surrounding context clues is tangible, measurable progress.
You are actively building robust exam intelligence. You are not falling behind the curve. You are painstakingly building depth.
Well said. Let's take a moment to briefly conceptually recap the massive landscape we have journeyed through today. We have established that IELTS Reading is emphatically not just about mechanically translating words. It is a sophisticated test of rapid recognition, contextual deduction, structural paraphrasing, and cognitive speed.
We deeply explored the subtle, critical differences between a situation deteriorating in quality versus simply diminishing in size.
We looked closely at how executing viable, permanent solutions differs vastly from merely mitigating the surface-level symptoms of a problem.
We uncovered the absolute vital importance of demanding empirical, data-driven evidence, and we analyzed exactly how ambiguous, unclear wording can effortlessly trap an unwary candidate in a true, false, not given question.
We decoded the cautious, balanced, polite tone of high-level academic writing, and we armed you with practical, actionable strategies to map the structural relationships in a text rather than getting bogged down translating every abstract noun.
The golden overarching rule of today's deep dive is this: do not attempt to memorize vocabulary like a robotic machine. Learn to absorb and utilize it like a master reader.
And this raises an important question, a final provocative thought for you to carry forward into your daily life. The next time you sit down to read anything, whether it is a complex news article, a long-form blog post, or even a detailed social media update from a popular science page, I want you to pause and actively ask yourself, if a devious IELTS test maker were to design a high-level reading question based exclusively on this one paragraph, what 3 specific words would they deliberately change to hide the answer?
Start reading the world like a test maker, constantly looking for those hidden synonym chains and the underlying structural arguments. When you shift your perspective and start actively anticipating the traps before they're sprung, you will never fall for them again.
What a brilliant, empowering way to look at it. Read like the enemy. If today's deep dive helped you see the hidden matrix of IELTS reading vocabulary in a completely new structural way, you are already moving rapidly in the right direction. Keep reading widely, keep noticing those subtle patterns, and keep building those neural pathways. Your target IELTS score isn't built in one frantic day of cramming. It is built layer by layer through consistent, highly strategic practice. Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We'll see you in the next deep dive.